The wind howled across the ridges of the Black Hills, a sound carrying the weight of legend and the echo of bloodshed. It was 1876, under a sky heavy with tension, where rivers carved their winding paths through endless grasslands, and two men stood on the precipice between life and death, between history and myth. Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse. Names that resonated like oaths, like stories any Sioux child would hear, whispered in awe and fear. They were not mere figures in history books. They were living embodiments of an unbroken spirit, a people rising against an empire. A curse, a battle, a moment the Western world would never fully understand. Old yellowed newspapers from the eastern states tell of a confrontation that fate would decide in mere hours. U.S. Army officers laughed, convinced that a band of native warriors would crumble before the might of cavalry pistols and cannons. But they were wrong. There were spirits warriors whose very gaze could make an opponent tremble, Sitting Bull eyes deep as night foresaw what was yet to come. Dreams, omens, and prophecies received in long, sleepless nights warned of a battle destined to enter legend, the Battle of Little Bighorn. It was not simply a victory or defeat that would be remembered, but a curse lingering across the plains. Whispered tales of battlefield ghosts, spirits unlaid to rest, and vows that would never be broken. Crazy Horse, the warrior of land rivers and open plains, his hands gripping his weapon tightly, standing among his people as if the very fate of his nation rested in each step, each breath. They did not fight merely to survive, but to ensure that every invader would remember their names, retell their story for generations. And then, the sound of cavalry, the crack of gunfire, the pounding of hooves in the mist of the early morning. The echoes of battle had yet to fade. To the outside world, it was just another clash in the West, but to the survivors, to the lingering spirits, to the forbidden tales never written down, it was a day where history and legend collided. As you listen now, as your eyes trace the contours of the land, the footsteps left behind you are stepping into an unclosed circle, where time and space yield to the story, where the historical witnesses have vanished, but oral tradition reverberates, haunting and persistent. This story is not for the faint-hearted. Every blade of grass, every ridge and valley seem to hold its own memory. The scent of gunpowder mingled with the crisp earth. Shadows stretched long and dark across the hills, carrying with them whispers of the fallen of warriors who would not be forgotten. The sun struggled to pierce through the mist, illuminating the faces of Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, faces hardened by vision and battle, eyes alive with prophecy, resolve, and a quiet, terrifying power. And in that silence before the storm, when the first shots had yet to ring, the land itself seemed to hold its breath. Every whisper of wind, every rustle of the grass spoke of fate, of courage, of a legend still breathing beneath the surface of history. The stage was set, the players ready, and the story that would haunt generations was about to unfold. The Black Hills rose in silent grandeur, their jagged peaks cutting jagged silhouettes into the pale blue of dawn, streaked with clouds tinged pink and gold. Mist lingered stubbornly in the valleys and crevices, curling around ancient rocks, rolling down slopes like ghostly serpents, wrapping the world in the veil of secrecy. The hills themselves seemed alive, breathing with a presence both eternal and watchful, holding stories older than memory, whispers of warriors and hunters of spirits and ancestors who had walked these lands long before outsiders even knew their names. Every ridge and hollow, every gnarled tree and outcropping of stone was a sentinel keeping silent watch over a land sacred to the Sioux. And on this morning, every inch of it seemed charged with anticipation, with the taut electricity of destiny waiting to snap. The wind swept across the ridges, cold and biting, carrying the scent of damp earth, crushed grass, and distant pine. It rustled through the tall prairie grasses that rolled across the plains like waves, creating a sound like the hushed murmuring of a vast congregation. The soft patter of hooves in the corrals punctuated the morning as horses shifted nervously, stamping their feet into the soil, nostrils flaring ears, flicking at every subtle sound. The plains themselves seemed to respond to this tension, the land holding its breath, almost aware of the weight pressing down upon the camp of the Sioux. Even the smallest details, the bend of a stream, the shadow of a tree, the slope of a hill carried significance, potential danger, or opportunity. Lodges of buffalo hides and wooden poles dotted the terrain in small, carefully arranged circles. Smoke from cooking fires spiraled upward, mingling with the mist, adding layers of haze that softened edges and distorted distances. The smell of roasted bison, dried berries, and cornmeal filled the air, grounding the camp in the routines of daily life, even as war approached. Women moved with practiced calm, tending fires, grinding corn, sewing clothing, and checking provisions. Children darted among the lodges, playing mock battles, their laughter a fragile counterpoint to the tension surrounding them. Elders chanted softly in corners, invoking the protection of spirits, reciting songs and prayers whose meaning stretched beyond the spoken word, echoing across valleys and hills, linking generations past and present. Sitting Bull moved among his people with quiet authority, his tall frame carrying a stillness that demanded attention. His eyes, dark and deep, seemed to pierce both the present and the veiled future. He listened carefully to scouts returning from distant ridges, absorbing reports of distant troop movements, the placement of soldiers, the glint of sunlight on armor or weapons. Each word he spoke carried weight, rippling through the camp as if the land itself leaned in to hear. He had spent long nights fasting, praying, and communing with spirits, receiving visions that guided his strategy and prepared him for what was to come. In every gesture, in every glance, there was a calm intensity, a profound awareness that the decisions made in these hours could ripple across generations. Crazy Horse moved differently, exuding restless, kinetic energy. He rode along the ridges, observing, calculating, feeling every contour of the land beneath him. His movements were fluid and precise, every step measured, every glance purposeful. Horses and riders glided through the tall grasses, the blades bending without breaking beneath hooves, carrying him silently across the plains. He adjusted the position of a warrior here, offered a quiet word of counsel there, always with an eye toward the unseen, the hidden advantage, the subtle shifts that could turn the tide of battle. His mind was a constant blend of instinct and strategy, reading both the terrain and the minds of his adversaries with the same clarity. Even the atmosphere contributed to the mounting tension. Clouds hung low and heavy, threatening rain, casting shifting shadows across the golden grasslands. Sunlight pierced the mist in thin, pale shafts, illuminating rocks, rivers, and patches of grass in sudden brilliance, as if spotlighting elements of an unseen stage. Birds of prey circled high above, their cries slicing through the quiet, their watchful eyes tracing movement below. The very air seemed to hum with energy, charged with the anticipation of violence, courage, and history about to be written. The land itself became part of the story. Every hilltop offered both lookout and trap, every dip in the earth a hiding place for warriors or a potential hazard for invaders. Streams reflected the sky in liquid silver, carrying shadows and sounds that could conceal footsteps or betray them. Windswept ridges provided both vantage and danger, requiring careful navigation, intimate knowledge, and absolute trust in one's instincts. To the Sioux, every natural feature was a tool, a weapon, a messenger. To the approaching soldiers, the same hills were obstacles, unfamiliar and treacherous. The people of the Sioux existed in this delicate balance, their lives a seamless fusion of daily survival ritual and preparation for conflict. Preparations for war were meticulous, yet fluid arrows, sharpened bows, strung knives, and the occasional firearm checked and polished. Horses were groomed and inspected, saddles adjusted, the smallest details attended to with care that bordered on reverence. Rituals continued in parallel, prayers for guidance and protection woven through every action. Songs, chants, and ceremonial dances were performed not for show, but to invoke ancestors' spirits and the protection of forces unseen. Every act, every motion carried resonance and purpose, connecting the mundane with the sacred. The tension was almost tangible. Scouts returned from distant hills with urgent news troop movements, observed distant columns, spotted glimmers of armor or weapons catching the rising sun. Every rustle in the grass, every snapping twig, every distant bird call was noted, interpreted, catalogued. Even the children playing in mock combat sensed the anxiety in the air, the rhythm of fear and anticipation that threaded through the camp. The Black Hills themselves seemed to lean in closer shadows, lengthening sunlight, shifting mists, curling as if the land were aware of the destiny unfolding upon it. Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, central figures in this living tableau, prepared their people with both patience and urgency. One observed, the other acted. One contemplated strategy and prophecy, the other embodied readiness and instinct. Together they represented the convergence of wisdom and action, foresight and courage, leadership and fearlessness. The camp of the Sioux was alive with ritual movement and anticipation. A community acutely aware that the days ahead could alter the course of their people forever. As the sun climbed higher, piercing the mist and illuminating the plains, the stage was fully set. Every hill, every tree, every bend in the river was accounted for, mapped in the minds of warriors, observed and respected. The land sacred and eternal bore silent witness. Every heartbeat, every breath, every sound carried the weight of history and legend. The Black Hills, cloaked in mist and sunlight and wind and shadow, waited, as did Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, and the warriors of the Sioux. Their story was about to unfold, and the plains themselves would never forget. The morning sun crept over the jagged Black Hills, scattering pale shafts of light across the rolling grasslands and jagged outcroppings. Mist curled around the foothills like drifting smoke, revealing and concealing the land in alternating patterns, creating illusions of movement where there was none. Every slope, every hidden ravine, every bend of the Little Bighorn River carried weight beyond its physical presence. To the Sioux, the land was alive, speaking in whispers and shadows, conveying warnings, lessons, and prophecies passed down through countless generations. The Black Hills were not just a backdrop for human action, they were a participant, a sentient witness, a silent guide to those who knew how to listen. Within this sacred theater, the Sioux camp moved with the rhythm of preparation and ritual. Warriors checked and rechecked their bows, arrows, knives, and the few firearms available to them, each movement precise, almost ceremonial. Horses were inspected and tended with devotion, their breath misting in the cool morning air, hooves sinking into dew-laden grass. Women and children moved among the lodges, performing daily chores, grinding corn, tending fires, drying meat, but their motions were interlaced with caution, with awareness, each small act threaded with an underlying sense of imminent confrontation. The camp was alive, vibrant, yet every movement carried the quiet tension of expectation, a tension almost tangible in the air. Sitting Bull, standing at the edge of a ridge overlooking the camp, exuded a presence both commanding and ethereal. His eyes, dark and fathomless, scanned the horizon, piercing the veil of mist and distance, to read signs invisible to others. He had spent nights in solitude, fasting and praying, communing with the spirits of the land and the ancestors of his people. In these visions, he saw the enemy approaching, the course of battle, and the fates of warriors. I saw soldiers fall before us like corn before the wind. He recounted to close advisors, his voice low but resonant, and yet the earth itself wept beneath our feet. The blood of the brave will water the plains, and the spirits will bear witness. These words, spoken in the quiet intimacy of the lodge, carried through the camp like a current, shaping the mindset of warriors and the rhythm of preparation. Crazy Horse moved differently, a restless energy coiled into human form. He rode along ridges and through the tall grasses, observing, analyzing, intuiting. Every bend in the river, every rise in the land, every shadow became a tool, a clue, a possible advantage. He spoke rarely, yet when he did, it was to communicate a subtle strategy, often using imagery drawn from the land itself, The trees bend with the wind. The clouds shift with intention. Listen, and you will know the enemy's path. To outsiders, these might have seemed cryptic or superstitious. To the Sioux, they were vital insights blending spiritual intuition with tactical genius. Meanwhile, the sacred rituals continued alongside preparation for conflict. Elders conducted ceremonies invoking the Great Spirit, offering prayers for protection, clarity, and guidance. Songs and chants reverberated across the camp, each drumbeat and vocal intonation carrying meaning beyond the audible. Children playing among the lodges learned these rhythms by imitation, absorbing lessons of courage, strategy, and respect for the land and the spirits. The boundaries between daily life ceremonial practice and military preparation were fluid, a reflection of a worldview in which the spiritual and the temporal were inseparable. Historical records paint a parallel, more clinical picture. Army reports catalog troop movements, numbers and resources: approximately 1,500 to 2,000 hostile forces observed along the Little Bighorn River. Terrain heavily favors defenders. Engagement not advised without reinforcements. Lieutenant Colonel Custer's own journals reflected confidence bordering on hubris. Enemy encampment located. Engagement imminent. Our cavalry is well equipped. Resistance expected to be minimal. Yet, these factual accounts fail to capture the intangible qualities that Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse brought to the plains. The foresight, the spiritual guidance, the unity, and the intimate understanding of terrain. Facts alone could not account for the presence that radiated from these leaders, a presence that shaped not only the actions of their warriors, but the very flow of events. In Sioux oral tradition, the Battle of Little Bighorn was foreshadowed by months of visions, prophecies, and ceremonial guidance. Sitting Bull had foreseen a river flowing red with the blood of the brave, a convergence of fate and courage that would mark the people forever. Elders passed these stories along in hushed tones at firesides, teaching younger generations that the outcome of battles was influenced as much by spiritual alignment and adherence to tradition as by physical prowess or numbers. Dreams were recorded, though not in ink. They were etched into memory, passed down verbally, woven into the cadence of chants, the rhythm of drum beats, and the placement of ceremonial objects across the camp. Scouts moving silently through the grasses and hills were part of this network of observation, linking spiritual foresight with practical intelligence. The flight of birds, the shape of clouds, the scent carried on the wind, all were interpreted as signs guiding decisions about movement, positioning, and timing. One scout later recounted how Crazy Horse paused mid-ride, raising a hand to the wind, and declared, "The hills speak tonight. Listen, and we will know which way to turn." These words were not merely poetic. They were a living methodology, integrating nature's spirituality and tactical awareness. Even the smallest details carried significance. A cairn of rocks atop a ridge could signal a vantage point. The bend of a stream might conceal warriors or allow them to observe without being seen. Every shadow was read for opportunity, every gust of wind weighed for meaning. In the convergence of fact and folklore, the Sioux transformed their environment into both a sanctuary and a strategic instrument, wielding knowledge that was invisible to outsiders, yet potent beyond measure. By midday, the camp hummed with activity. Drums echoed softly, interwoven with a murmur of prayers and chants. Warriors practiced silent maneuvers, adjusting positions, reviewing tactics passed down through oral tradition. Women prepared food, tended horses, and reinforced lodges, all within the framework of ritual awareness. Even the children observing internalized lessons of bravery, vigilance, and the sacred duty of preserving the land and the people. Every sensory detail was amplified by anticipation. The smell of pine and earth, the feel of damp grass underfoot, the distant glint of sunlight off weaponry, even the slightest change in wind direction, all were noted, interpreted, and incorporated into the collective understanding of the camp. Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse oversaw the preparation, embodying the duality of leadership. One contemplative, one kinetic. One spiritual, one tactical. Both converging in a synergy that made the Sioux force greater than the sum of its parts. As the afternoon shadows lengthened across the Black Hills, the camp settled into a tense equilibrium. The plains themselves seemed to hold their breath, the hills and rivers and trees, all participants in the unfolding drama. Every warrior, elder, woman, and child became part of a living tapestry of preparation, legend, and strategy, their lives intertwined with the land and the spirits that guided them. In this place, at this time, history and folklore merged, creating a reality that could not be captured in journals or dispatches, only experienced through presence, observation, and immersion. And so, with the Black Hills standing eternal around them, Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse positioned their people at the threshold of fate. Every action, every vision, every ritual contributing to a narrative that was both immediate and timeless. The plains were alive, breathing with anticipation as the stage was set for a collision that would echo across generations, blending fact and legend into a single, indelible story. As dusk deepened over the Black Hills, the camp seemed suspended between worlds, the tangible and the mystical, the seen and the unseen. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, curling across the plains and valleys, creating phantom ridges that shifted with the dimming light. The wind whispered through the grass like a chorus of spirits carrying echoes of the past. It was in these liminal hours that the unusual events, the rising incidents, began to accumulate, layering tension over every hill ridge and river bend. Scouts returned faces, pale hands trembling, recounting anomalies too precise to dismiss. One spoke of following a trail of horse tracks that abruptly ended at the edge of a bluff, as if the ground itself had swallowed them. Another described a sudden rush of movement in the trees, shadows of enormous figures, humanoid but impossible in proportion, vanishing the instant he focused his gaze. Yet, in each case, the warriors understood these were messages, omens, or signs, guidance from the spirits that shaped their tactics and strengthened their resolve. Sitting Bull stood silently atop a ridge, observing the play of shadows across the camp. His eyes, deep and reflective, traced patterns invisible to ordinary sight. "The land speaks," he whispered to an aide, "and so do the spirits. Listen carefully. They are revealing the unseen paths, the hidden dangers, and the opportunities that lie ahead." These were not idle words. Among the Sioux, dreams, visions, and inexplicable occurrences were integral to preparation. They were layers of intelligence as real and vital as maps or scouts' reports. Crazy Horse rode the ridges with a restless intensity. He noted unnatural behavior among the buffalo herds, sudden stampedes with no visible cause, animals frozen in place as if sensing a presence invisible to human eyes. Birds altered flight patterns, inexplicably avoiding certain ridges where scouts later discovered cavalry patrols, hinting at a mysterious alignment between the natural world and Sioux strategy. Every anomaly was carefully observed, interpreted, and integrated into decisions, a fusion of empirical observation and spiritual insight. The elders of the camp told stories that intertwined with these events. One spoke of Sitting Bull's vision months prior during a sun dance, a cloud shaped like a warrior horse moving across the hills, signaling that the land itself would aid the Sioux in moments of trial. Another recounted a dream in which rivers turned red, carrying both warning and prophecy. "The spirits of the ancestors watch closely," the elder intoned, "and they guide us in ways the enemy cannot see or understand." These narratives were not mere superstition. They were tactical, ethical, and strategic frameworks that guided every action, every placement of warriors, and every preparation for battle. Many incidents multiplied, layering the tension. A small group of hunters reported seeing footprints larger than any buffalo leading toward the river and disappearing entirely. Fires in distant parts of the hills ignited and extinguished spontaneously, leaving no trace of human intervention. Whispers like voices of long-departed warriors seemed to drift across the mist, naming individuals and warning of paths to avoid. Scouts observed distant figures moving in perfect synchrony with the terrain, appearing and vanishing as though woven into the hills themselves. The combination of the observed and the unseen reshaped perception. For outsiders, these might appear as coincidences or superstition. For the Sioux, they were an extension of intelligence and intuition integrated with physical preparation. Every ridge was considered, every tree, examined, every bend in the river, accounted for both in reality and in the unseen world of prophecy. The camp itself pulsed with tension. Warriors moved with silent precision, practicing maneuvers, checking weapons, and responding to the faintest cues of the terrain or wind. Fires flickered as if alive, casting elongated dancing shadows on lodges and tents. Children, unaware of the full weight of events, mirrored their elders' vigilance and play, absorbing the rhythm of readiness and reverence. Women moved through the camp with quiet grace, tending to food, water, and supplies, performing duties that were both ordinary and profoundly ritualistic, sustaining life while honoring the sacred. Even as night deepened, phenomena persisted. The river's current seemed to quicken at unusual bends, reflecting moonlight in eerie, shifting patterns. Wolves howled in coordinated sequences, appearing in places impossible to predict. Clouds formed shapes that mirrored the movements of warriors below. Sitting Bull interpreted these as signs that the land and spirits were in alignment, offering guidance to position, anticipate, and respond. Crazy Horse reinforced these insights by positioning scouts and warriors along ridges and bluffs, integrating prophecy, intuition, and landscape into a coherent anticipatory defense. The cumulative effect of these rising incidents was almost unbearable. The air carried a weight of expectation, anxiety, and awe. Every sound, the creak of leather, a horse pawing the earth, the distant murmur of water, the sigh of the wind, was amplified. Shadows seemed to move with purpose. The camp was no longer simply a human settlement. It was a living organism, alert and attuned to both physical and spiritual currents. Sitting Bull's and Crazy Horse's leadership, blending foresight, intuition, and spiritual understanding, bound the warriors together, creating cohesion that defied numbers or conventional military analysis. By the final hours before the anticipated engagement, the Black Hills themselves seemed to lean closer, as if observing, participating, and judging. Each rising incident, unexplainable tracks, phantom movements, prophetic dreams, and shifting shadows, was no longer incidental. They were part of a narrative, unfolding across land, sky, and spirit. The warriors, guided by ancestral wisdom, visions, and tangible preparation, were ready to respond not only to human threats, but to the larger forces woven into the fabric of this sacred landscape. The tension, suspense, and strangeness had reached a crescendo, a taut string vibrating across hills, valleys, and rivers. In the interplay between fact and folklore, the Black Hills had become a stage upon which destiny and legend would collide. And as night settled fully, bringing with it shadows deeper than darkness itself, the Sioux camp waited, silent but alert, ready to transform anticipation, vision, and preparation into action, into a story that would echo through time, inseparable from the myths and realities that converged in the hours ahead. The morning light barely pierced the lingering mist that clung stubbornly to the Black Hills, casting the rolling plains into a muted haze of gray and gold. The earth itself seemed to hold its breath, as if anticipating the collision that was about to unfold. Sitting Bull stood atop a rocky outcrop cloak of buffalo hide. Draped around his shoulders, eyes narrowing as he scanned the distant tree line. The wind whispered through the tall grasses, carrying not only the scent of pine and damp earth, but something deeper. The weight of history, the presence of spirits, and the silent warnings of ancestors long gone. Today, he murmured to the nearest warriors, the Great Spirit walks with us, and the land remembers. Below him, Crazy Horse led his riders along a ridge, moving with a fluid grace that seemed almost otherworldly. Every movement was calculated, yet instinctive, guided by visions, dreams, and the subtle cues of the terrain. A distant column of cavalry began to stir, unaware of the traps hidden among the undulating hills and river bends. The first arrow flew silently, cutting through the mist, followed by the sharp crack of rifles. Chaos erupted, yet, for the Sioux, it was not disorder, it was orchestrated, a dance of shadow and light, reality and legend intertwined. Many incidents began to escalate. Layering tension upon tension, scouts reported seeing footprints larger than any horse appearing near river bends and disappearing as though swallowed by the earth. Fires ignited on distant hillsides, with no cause flickering briefly before dying. Warriors whispered of ghostly figures moving through the trees, translucent shapes that guided them to advantageous positions, or warned of unseen threats. Even the wind carried voices carrying the names of warriors, the echoes of victories past, and urgent instructions that only those attuned to the spirits could understand. Sitting Bull's vision from months earlier now seemed to manifest tangibly. In the Sundance prophecy, the river ran red. The hills echoed with cries, and shadowed figures moved to protect the righteous. On the battlefield, he directed warriors with words that felt both practical and mystical. Hold the bluff, do not falter. The spirits guide your hands and your steps. Each command carried weight, resonating with the warrior's understanding of the unseen forces at work. Crazy Horse translated these into motion, positioning troops along ridges, hollows, and river bends, every placement informed as much by intuition and spiritual insight as by strategic necessity. The cavalry, confident in numbers and firearms, advanced into a landscape they neither knew nor respected. But each ridge seemed alive, each hollow a trap, each misty shadow a warning. Warriors emerged from concealment, as if conjured from the hills themselves, striking with precision. Arrows and bullets flew, horses charged, and soldiers faltered, disoriented not only by terrain, but by phenomena they could neither explain nor anticipate. Unusual occurrences continued to compound the tension. Wolves howled from multiple directions, appearing in impossible locations. Shadows lengthened in ways that defied physics, creating illusions of additional forces. Fires ignited and extinguished with perfect timing, signaling danger or opportunity. Young scouts reported whispers on the wind, naming individuals, warning of ambushes, and conveying cryptic advice that proved astonishingly accurate. Each incident individually might have been dismissed, but collectively they created an atmosphere in which fact and folklore merged, shaping strategy, morale, and perception. As the battle progressed, the landscape itself seemed to act in concert with the defenders. Streams shifted, currents quickened, reflecting sunlight in angles that concealed movement or revealed traps. Clouds coalesced into unnatural forms, echoing the positions of warriors. Even the soil trembled underfoot, a subtle vibration synchronizing with the heartbeat of those who belonged to the land. These were not mere coincidences. They were confirmations of ancestral guidance visions realized, and the land itself participating in the battle. In the thick of the engagement, spectral phenomena were reported. Warriors claimed to see ghostly figures of fallen ancestors moving among the living, guiding arrows, bolstering courage and warning of danger. One scout recounted glimpsing an ethereal horse, riderless, galloping along the ridge, leading warriors away from harm. The air vibrated with the echoes of chants and cries, blending past and present, the living and the dead, reinforcing the conviction that this battle was both physical and spiritual. Every action carried dual significance. An advance was not just a maneuver. It was an enactment of prophecy. A retreat was not just tactical. It respected unseen forces. Arrows guided by intuition and ancestral memory found their marks. Cavalry units faltered, confused by both the terrain and the seemingly impossible coordination of the Sioux. Every ridge, every bluff, every bend in the river became a theater where human skill and mystical awareness intersected. The crescendo approached. Arrows and rifles continued to strike, warriors moved with ghostly precision, and soldiers reported shadows moving independently of their owners, adding to disorientation. Fires flared unexpectedly, revealing hidden warriors or concealing movement. Wolves and birds moved strategically, unnerving enemies. Sitting Bull's commands, crazy horses' fluid execution, and the ancestral presence intertwined, creating a crescendo that reached beyond the physical. The Black Hills themselves had become active participants, a living canvas of prophecy and courage. As evening fell, the battlefield was enveloped in mist and smoke, merging earth, water, and sky into a surreal tapestry. The cries of the living and dead seemed to intermingle, and warriors swore they felt hands unseen guiding them, shielding them from fatal missteps. The river, glowing in the last light, carried reflections of both the actual and the spectral, symbolizing the convergence of history, legend, and prophecy. The battle was no longer simply fought. It was enacted, observed, and recorded by the land, the spirits, and the memories of ancestors. By the end of the day, it was clear to all present that this confrontation had transcended mere military engagement. Victory was not only a matter of strategy and strength, but of spiritual alignment, ancestral guidance, and the seamless fusion of human skill with the wisdom of the unseen. The Black Hills, silent yet alive, bore witness to every shot, every movement, every anomaly, and every prophetic moment. The battlefield had become a living testament to the intertwining of fact and folklore, of courage and prophecy, of history and myth, a climax of cinematic scale that would echo through generations. As night fell over the Black Hills, the battlefield seemed suspended between two worlds. Mist rose from the earth, curling around jagged rocks and ridges, moving like ghostly fingers across the plains. Fires smoldered in scattered patches, their orange glow casting long, quivering shadows across the still silhouettes of fallen warriors. The air was thick with the scent of earth, smoke, and iron, a pungent reminder of courage, sacrifice, and the raw immediacy of mortality. Every rustle of grass, every whisper of wind, every distant cry of a wolf or bird seemed amplified, imbued with meaning beyond human comprehension. Sitting Bull stood atop a ridge cloak of buffalo hide, draped around his shoulders, eyes scanning the devastated plains. He felt the weight of history pressing upon him, the echoes of ancestors, the cries of the fallen, the energy of the living, and the whispers of prophecy fulfilled. "The land has witnessed us," he murmured, voice low but resonant, "and the spirits have judged our courage. But the stories are not finished. The echoes will continue." Every word, every pause carried the gravity of a leader who understood both the tangible and intangible, the physical and spiritual stakes of this battle. Crazy Horse moved among the survivors, silent yet electric, a conduit of focus and morale. He checked positions, encouraged the wounded, and guided the remaining warriors. The battlefield itself seemed to respond to him. The mist shifted, shadows lengthened, and distant hills provided cover exactly where he expected. Warriors recounted moments when spectral figures appeared, ghostly ancestors riding along ridges, pointing, guiding, protecting. One young scout swore he saw a translucent horse galloping ahead, disappearing just as he approached, yet leaving an imprint of certainty in his heart. The lines between folklore, vision, and reality blurred, reinforcing courage and cohesion across the camp. Even as the night deepened, the land continued to whisper. The river's currents shimmered unnaturally under moonlight, bending reflections into shapes that mimicked warriors in motion. Fires flickered without fuel, casting ghostly images across ridges. Wolves prowled along the tree line in patterns that unnerved enemy troops, but bolstered Sioux morale. Whispers carried on the wind, names, warnings, encouragement, blending ancestral voices with the present in a haunting, motivating chorus. These phenomena, though invisible to outsiders, shaped the perception and decisions of warriors, intertwining prophecy with tactical reality. Amid the chaos, human emotion played out in raw, cinematic intensity. Sitting Bull, observing from his vantage point, felt grief and pride. Intertwined grief for those who felt pride in the unity, courage, and precision of his people. Crazy Horse, eyes alight with fierce determination, rode tirelessly, a presence that inspired calm focus and boldness. Young warriors, their faces smeared with paint and soot, moved with a rhythm learned from generations, each step guided by both training and intuition, honed by dreams and visions whispered to them by elders. Women tended fires, dressed wounds, and whispered prayers for protection, blending care and ritual into every action. Children, frightened, yet attentive, mirrored movements they had practiced in play, internalizing courage and vigilance for a future they could scarcely yet imagine. The battlefield itself had become a living narrative, a convergence of action and myth. Shadowed ridges concealed not only warriors, but also memories and spirits. River bends reflected both the physical and spectral. The wind carried guidance and warning simultaneously. Many incidents continued phantom footsteps leading to ambushes, fleeting figures blocking enemy sight lines, fires igniting or extinguishing at moments of critical tension. Each event isolated might seem supernatural or coincidental. Collectively, they wove a pattern that integrated folklore, prophecy, and tactical precision, creating a crescendo of suspense and awe. By midnight, the Black Hills had assumed their role as silent witness and active participant. Every ridge, every hollow, every stream and tree carried the weight of history, prophecy, and legend. Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse at the heart of this living story embodied leadership that merged physical strategy with spiritual attunement. Their presence alone seemed to guide warriors' movements, their instincts amplified by dreams, ancestral guidance, and the land itself. Every shot fired, every arrow loosed, every charge executed was infused with both human skill and a force beyond comprehension. Even in the aftermath, the battlefield refused to be silent. Shadows lingered long after warriors had settled. Whispers persisted in the wind, and spectral forms were reported moving through the terrain. Survivors spoke of visions, ancestors walking among them, rivers flowing with spectral red protective spirits, shielding individuals from fatal blows. Each vision reinforced the sacredness of the land, the legitimacy of the Sioux struggle, and the intertwining of prophecy with lived reality. By the end of P5, the Black Hills bore witness to a story that transcended mortal comprehension. History and legend converged seamlessly. Fact and folklore became inseparable. The Sioux had not only defended their land, they had enacted visions and prophecy, orchestrated strategy and courage, and ensured that the events would echo for generations in song, story, and memory. Every shadow, every whisper, every apparition, every pulse of the land had contributed to a narrative that was at once terrifying, triumphant, and profoundly mystical. Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse stood among their people, victorious yet somber, aware that this night would be remembered forever, not merely as a battle, but as a testament to the convergence of courage, strategy, and the unseen forces that guided them. The first light of dawn revealed the aftermath of the battle, in all its stark, haunting reality. The plains stretched in silence, dotted with scattered remnants of what had been a violent, chaotic clash, the tattered remains of lodges and supplies, flattened grass where warriors had fallen, and the deep impressions of hooves and feet that would linger for generations. Yet the silence was deceptive. The air itself seemed heavy with memory, carrying whispers of the fallen, murmurs of those who had survived, and the unbroken hum of the land saturated with the resonance of sacrifice and courage. Sitting Bull stood at the edge of the battlefield, surveying the scene with a mixture of triumph, grief, and solemnity. Victory had been achieved, but at a profound cost. Faces of the young and old, of women who had supported, of warriors who had perished, lingered in his memory. The Black Hills, sacred and eternal, had witnessed acts that would echo across time. Even in the decades that followed, the land would carry the energy of that day, shaping the consciousness of those who returned to the plains and those who heard the stories long after the last rifle had fallen silent. Crazy Horse, moving among the survivors, felt the weight of both pride and sorrow. He guided the wounded, comforted the frightened, and reinforced the cohesion of the remaining warriors. Yet his mind was filled with visions, ghostly reminders of those who had fallen, spectral forms of ancestors rising from the earth to bless, guide, or silently mourn. The folklore of the Sioux had begun to weave itself into the physical reality of the battlefield, tales of spirits appearing alongside warriors, guiding arrows or whispering warnings in the night. Every shadow in the hills, every flicker of firelight became a potential sign, a fragment of story, a link between history and myth. As days turned into months and months into years, the echoes of the battle continued to reverberate. The land bore invisible scars, hollows where the dead had fallen, grass trampled into patterns of remembrance, streams carrying whispers of sacrifice. Travelers and settlers passing through the region would sometimes report inexplicable sounds in the wind, voices, footsteps, or the faint clatter of hooves where no living creature was visible. These reports, dismissed by some as imagination, were remembered by Sioux storytellers as evidence that the spirits of the fallen remained guardians and witnesses to the courage displayed, the vows fulfilled, and the prophecy realized. Generations would later recount dreams that seemed linked to the battlefield. Children and young warriors spoke of visions, the river glimmering red in moonlight, ancestral figures guiding them along paths of wisdom, and warnings of danger embedded in the whispers of wind or rustle of leaves. Elders taught that these dreams were gifts from the great spirit, echoes of a battle that transcended the ordinary, lessons for those yet to be born, about courage, loyalty, and the consequences of conflict. Each dream reinforced the sacredness of the land and the memory of those who had fought. The psychological aftermath was as profound as the physical. Survivors carried scars, both visible and invisible. The tremor of fear, the flash of memory, the weight of grief for friends and kin lost. At the same time, pride and unity infused the people they had defended, not only land, but identity, sovereignty, and spiritual continuity. Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse became living symbols of resilience and vision, their deeds enshrined in song, story, and ritual. Even decades later, their presence was invoked in dances, chants, and oral histories, ensuring that the memory of the day and its mystical dimensions remained vivid and influential. Stories of spectral warriors continued to circulate. Hunters reported fleeting figures moving through the mist, protective shadows that guided them safely or warned of danger. Fires would flare briefly in abandoned ridges, casting strange dancing shapes that seemed to mimic long-gone combatants. These tales, integrated into Sioux folklore, became part of the moral and cultural framework, teaching respect for the land, for ancestors, and for the spiritual dimensions that intertwined with the physical world. The Black Hills, witness to both prophecy and mortal action, had absorbed the energy of the battle. Their ridges and valleys carried echoes, patterns in grass, and subtle shifts in wind that served as reminders of the day's events. Even as new generations were born, the land seemed to hum with the memory of courage, strategy, sacrifice, and spiritual alignment. The story of the battle became a living narrative, ever present in dream songs and whispered tales at firesides. In the final light of the documentary, the camera or the reader lingers on the sacred ridges and river bends. Shadows lengthen in the mist, evoking both the physical and spectral participants. The wind carries a chorus of ancestral voices, echoing warnings, blessings, and recollections. Sitting Bull's and Crazy Horse's figures, though historical, loom larger in memory and legend, their leadership, courage, and vision enduring far beyond the battlefield. And as the narration draws to a close, a quiet question remains suspended in the air. What other truths lost to time or hidden in shadows still echo across the plains? What stories have yet to be told? What visions have yet to be shared? The Black Hills, the river, the ridges they hold, the answers waiting for those who listen, who dream, who remember. You have witnessed but one story in the endless circle. Subscribe and step further into the echoes that history and legend have yet to reveal.